Hello and welcome to the Insights Overflow podcast, the show where we talk to customers, partners, and industry leaders about the lessons that they've learned in order to make an impact. Today I'm joined by Johan, who's a leading voice for responsible AI in Africa. Johan, how's it going?
It's going well, Andrew, and it's really good to see you.
Good to see you. It's been probably a year since the last time that we spoke. So, if you had to summarize the last year in terms of development in AI and adoption in AI, how would you categorize sort of the movement this last year, and what have you seen on the ground?
Yeah, look, so I think regulation is a hotter topic than ever. The safe use of this technology, because it's increasing so exponentially in what it can do. The whole ChatGPT era, large language models, prompting, that's gone like crazy. I remember a year or so ago, you would almost or rarely see AI-related news. It was confined to the tech industry. Now everyone is talking about it. All our customers are talking about it. But in my experience, people are even more confused about what it is, can do or can't do than a year or two ago. It's this multimodal or modality that we, creating images and videos. A lot of questions around it. Fake news and the deep fakes is a big problem, especially for us as parents. Hopefully you can chat about that. So it's exciting. In the next 3 or 4 years, they reckon that large language models will be about 1,000 times more powerful than now.
Wow.
So that exponential growth is not going to stop. It's exciting, but we should also worry a bit, I think.
If you look, it's tough to keep up even when you're in the industry. Now, if you had to think about, the average guy, say, working for government or working inside of regulation, and now they have to first grasp this technology, try understand it, and then put some sort of safety nets or guardrails around it to sort of protect the population at large. If we're struggling to keep up, the gap between sort of the ordinary citizen is just getting wider and wider.
You're absolutely right. Look, I spend about an hour to 2 hours a morning just reading and watching videos and trying to catch up. And just on my YouTube feed, the kind of new things that's being released, new reviews, new books, new technological platform releases, I'm really struggling to keep up. I've now learned to listen to my podcast at twice the speed. Initially I struggled, but you're right. Somebody out there who's not working in this field, who maybe have heard about it, probably heard a lot of the incorrect things about what it can do. I don't know how they're going to keep up. That includes government and regulators. And I really see people falling on two sides of a spectrum. On the one hand, people who absolutely fear this technology, very dystopian view, a lot of it formed by Hollywood movies and the popular press. But what is more worrying these days is the other side of the spectrum. Overexcitement about it, thinking it can do anything. Let's just AI our whole business. It's the best thing since sliced bread. And that is where I think a lot of irresponsible use of it is happening, ethically, but also from a business point of view. In the past, when we had the so-called AI winters, when I think it's happened 3 times in the last 60 or so years, it basically happened that the promise of the tech was overhyped to what it can do. I, in a way, see it now again. I think people are getting despondent, especially business leaders, because what they've been promised by vendors potentially, or what they hear at conferences, and the practicalities of what the technology can do at the moment. But this exponential growth, this train is out of the station. We need to be on it in the right way. Parents should really educate themselves because their children are being exposed more and more, especially on their social media apps. Business leaders, and also everyone in the business, your HR department, legal, organizational design people, your receptionist, everyone should have some sort of an idea what it is and how to use it. But that kind of lack in the learning and development that I see in large businesses on just teaching your staff the basics of what AI is, it's a huge lack. And hopefully more and more training organizations will effectively be able to teach business leaders about this.
I recently gave a talk on AI to 17-year-olds at a high school, and I think a lot of them sort of conceptually understood what it could do, but there was obviously a large sort of knowledge gap missing. And one of the focuses of the talk was to basically inform them as to say, well, how AI is actually affecting their life without them knowing it. So I gave examples of the insurance industry, sort of calculating premiums, etc. And then I asked them, how many of you have used ChatGPT? And a lot of them said yes, they have, and basically for homework. And I think schools are trying to tread this fine line between educating the students about technology that will impact their lives into the future, as well as making sure that sort of the traditions of school, like doing your own homework and not letting ChatGPT do your own homework, are still in place. And I think the educators were really struggling to find that balance between enabling their students and sort of protecting them or holding them back from that. It was very interesting perspectives.
Yes. Look, I think education, whether it's primary, secondary, tertiary, corporate education, has got a real conundrum with this technology, because do you just outright block it, knowing that the student's still going to use it at home, or your workers? Or is it a total free reign? It's quite a difficult one. So with my son, who's 10 now, I'm trying to teach him to use it responsibly, not to be afraid of it. An example is from about a year ago, we've got a Google Home device, and he would ask it questions on it. There's a specific app, and it will give you scenarios and stories. And then this device started asking him things like, what is his father's name? Where do we live? What school does he go to? I mean, I had a backflip over my desk when I heard that. And to try and teach him, again, there's certain things that you can't share with the AI. Now, we teach our children about the so-called stranger danger, but psychology shows us in many studies that children tend to trust an AI or a chatbot a lot more than they would a stranger on the street. So it's those kind of things. And then I see a lot of people I work with, when they exam or test students, are starting to lean back to oral examinations. In other words, come and explain to me what you understand, rather than ChatGPTing it. The worry is that we will, and look, I already have an issue with our education system worldwide, but are we teaching children to learn, to think critically? Or will this technology essentially make us even dumber than we are at the moment? So it is a conundrum. I think a lot of schools are struggling with that balance, and companies for that matter as well.
Yeah, and when you look at the landscape of companies that are trying to implement AI, when they say, we need to AI everything, what do you see some of them doing or trying to do? Like, what do you see out there?
Yeah, look, I think a lot of people I have been dealing with are just lazy. They don't want to do their jobs, especially as executives or managers, because they think they can automate it. Now, whether that is determining the mental health of your employees, for instance. And yes, there are apps that can do that. We can look at the chatter on their emails and the like. But that human-to-human leadership skill cannot be replaced. That encouragement, sometimes that hard conversation. If you're not mature enough as a leader, you'll not be able to do it. But now you can even step away even more, thinking the AI is just going to do it.
Okay, that's interesting. Almost like using AI as a substitute for good leadership.
Absolutely.
Interesting.
And then also what they think AI can do. Firstly, about the power of technology. And we know, and we just said it's growing exponentially in power, but there's just certain things when it comes to your clients, for instance, that it can't do. One of the big mistakes I see is that we're building AI platforms for a business without even speaking with our customers about it, or our staff for that matter. I was at an investment bank 2 weeks ago where in Sandton, and the HR team told me they've now been mandated to use this new AI tool. And obviously the people at the top who made that decision, along with the consultants, never even spoke with the HR team. And they said now it takes them twice as long than it did before this tool was introduced. So, I always say be a consumer of your own product. Chat to your own chatbot, call your own contact center. But your customer is the ultimate judge of whether that thing will work. Stand in the queue at the bank. Listen in on contact center calls. Speak to your clients, because there's probably other things that will make their lives easier and that will increase your market share with them than you and your little bubble think and what AI can do. It's so common sense, but we know it's not that common.
And I think one of the great things about, let's call it large language models becoming, let's call it the de facto understanding of what AI is. What we see in the market, especially within the data space, is that, say, data is sort of complicated in nature and it's got a lot of context. Where we see potential use of large language models is to essentially scale business insights. So an example is we're working on a new module which basically integrates ChatGPT across the platform, where, for instance, if you receive a scheduled email in your inbox, it'll basically summarize your dashboard and your data for you, basically providing that insight. Whereas, say, traditional AI or machine learning was more about getting some data, training it, trying to make a prediction. The large language models essentially allow you to train, let's call it experts in your business, given the context of your data. So I think that's been a huge leap forward in people's understanding of what AI can truly do for them as opposed to traditional machine learning. But do you see businesses trying to train their own language models as opposed to leveraging like a ChatGPT or like a Facebook Llama 2, or, for instance, lawyers basically training their own large language models on their previous cases or interactions with customers?
Yeah.
Have you seen anything like that?
There's a lot of movement toward it. I think because business owners mistrust the tech, which they should. I always say, don't just put stuff, confidential information, spreadsheets, etc., into ChatGPT. I have seen significant breaches in OpenAI's platforms once or twice over the last year. But organizations like Microsoft, AWS, and others are offering clients what I call an internal ring-fenced large language model capability. But obviously then it's dependent on the maturity of their data. But it allows me to move from just asking questions to receiving answers. Now, I want to give you two quick use cases. The one is a law firm that I've worked with. You know, when they do discovery for a case, they typically work through 250,000 documents.
Yeah.
You know, scan that in. The platform tells them which of those documents are not relevant to the case, which ones are duplicates. And once they've refined that data set, then they start prompting and asking questions. I've even seen them look at the particular judge or jury, if we're talking about other jurisdictions, and how they have made their decisions, and to predict that human behavior given the case files. The other one is an HR team I worked with, and this is such a great example for me. I always say, my story is, if I want to take paternity leave in November, it's going to take me a long time to get to what I want to know, which is can I, and how long can I, etc. So I need to find our policy on leave. I need to find out what the labor law says. I need to see if there are any public holidays in that time. Am I booked to a client project already? Do I need approval, and so forth? Now, I go through 6 or 7 systems to try and find that answer. Imagine I can just prompt our internal. So I need to go, etc. And it comes back and say, you can take 5 days. Remember, you booked a client, speak to your. So just give me answers. Imagine how it will revolutionize contact centers or any internal kind of function where we need to make decisions quickly based on the right information without scouring through dashboards.
Yeah.
It's an era of articulation with AI, which is exciting. Yeah. But again, make sure it's secure and you have the right data is where I think most companies are struggling at the moment.
And, you know, we were talking earlier, and it was quite a surprise to me, is that we are in the process of putting together AI Act, I believe. Could you sort of talk more about that and sort of how that would help sort of add some regulation to what people are doing, in particular with their data and loading it into these large language models?
Look, we've got the biggest news has been the EU's AI Act over the last few months. It's been coming for a few years. I mean, all these member states had to agree and give input. And I think it was on the 1st of August now recently when it was enacted into law. There are still a number of steps going forward how they will mature this regulation. I think that regulatory framework will form the basis for many countries like ours. Now, the US, Canada, China, even countries in Africa are doing a lot around this, realizing they have to regulate it some way or another. The balancing act here is innovation and regulation. And also that this tech is growing so quickly, I don't know how regulation will keep up with it. One of the highlights of the EU AI Act for me, and I imagine if you're a South African business dealing with European companies, we're going to have to comply like we did with GDPR. They call it explainable AI. Now, I always say, if you think we have big contact centers at the moment, so I'll tell you why I think it's going to treble probably. If the EU AI Act, one of the many things is that I have the right to ask you as my bank how your algorithm got to that answer on my credit decision or credit limit increase. Now, Now I can phone you, so imagine how many calls you're going to get. But how do we then as a business get to that answer? How did the algorithm get there? Was there bias involved, etc.? So that explainability of AI, I think, is a great piece of the regulation. And then they also have from severity to less severe applications. So when it comes to healthcare, heart monitors, weaponization, etc., it's highly regulated. When it's just a simple Q&A chatbot, not really. Now in South Africa, there's been a lot in the press recently. I'm also on the working group where it's the CSIR and Department of Trade and Industry and a number of others who are working on ideas of putting a framework together to make recommendations to government. It's good that we do it. We just need to make sure that it's Africa relevant. Think of the fact that we have 3,000 languages on this continent. So how do we regulate chatbots into action, the nuances around that? So it's happening. It's high time that it does. I think we all should support it in whichever way we can. Will regulations save us from harm? Because that's ultimately the goal of regulation. I hope so. My problem in South Africa, I mean, we've had POPIA for some time now. We've had massive data breaches the last few years. You know, I've not seen anyone being prosecuted for that. So now we put AI regulation on top of that. Will people fear it enough, if that's what we need, to not screw around with my data and predictive algorithms? I'm supporting it. I'm just a bit worried that we'll actually get the benefit from it that we should.
I wonder if you could prompt a language model how it should be regulated and what sort of answer you'd get. I've also always had this thought that could another language model train another language model? So it's kind of like, you know, us as humans, we sort of get to a point where we say develop an AI, and then at what point could an AI be sort of self-fulfilling or iterative in its ability to essentially tweak itself? You know, do you see anybody like having conversations out there in terms of AI generating other AIs, or is it sort of more in the realm of conspiracy theory?
Yeah, look, I don't know if it's a conspiracy theory. It's what I have seen, because sometimes it feels to me that, for instance, ChatGPT is becoming dumber over time because it is generating its own training data as well. Because I think the data that's out there that is consumed for a while now is kind of overconsumed probably. So now, sometimes when I prompt it, and I use it every day, and it's amazing, but it feels to me that the need to re-prompt it, re-explain it is increasing at the moment. Now, it could just be my experience, but logic tells me that if you keep on training it on its own, or even if you then use a Gemini to teach a ChatGPT, I think it's going to decrease in strength. It's almost like, Andrew, like if you have a 7-year-old and you leave them for a year in your house, they need to figure out how to cook, how to protect themselves, how to be a human. It'll be a disaster.
Good.
AI, we can equate AI, if it was sentient right now, to a 7-year-old autistic child. Now, can we leave it to just train itself? We can't. So I think we'll see the value of the data and the prompting lower as it trains itself.
Well, I think that's a very interesting thing, because how much of our new content will be original? Because if you think about creating a blog post on a website, or creating marketing content or technical content for that matter, I would say 70% of people are probably using some sort of language model to help generate that content, of which, I mean, there's the saying that there's nothing new under the sun, but a lot of our content, even human generated, is AI assisted, which is essentially regurgitation of some sort of original content. So basically, all content in the future would be partly AI generated, which means that would basically feedback loop into future model training. And then essentially we'll get to a point of, say, diminishing originality, and then we'll start regurgitating the same stuff. But, I mean, yeah, I suppose that is anything truly original would be the more fundamental question. And I think another interesting concepts is this idea of text to action. That's one of the things that we've been thinking about, because if you think, say, in our world of data, it's fine if you just say look at something, but what do you do with it? How do you take action? And one of the things that we've seen is that when looking at data, some rules are very difficult to define. So for instance, say in an IoT context, you might say, well, when soil temperature is greater than this number, then turn the sprinklers on, etc. So those are very, say, mathematical based triggers, let's call it that. But another interesting concept to say would be to say, well, here is some data. Okay, language model, identify anomalies in this data for me, and if those anomalies exceed this amount, then reply yes or no. And actually using a response, then trigger an action. So we see the fact that sort of the average business user, when they interact with data, would actually want to speak in their language instead of, say, let's call it technical language, and actually let the model sort of be the interface between what they want and sort of what the data is telling them. So that's another interesting concept where, say even in home automation, etc., it wouldn't need to, say, program specific rules. You can say, oh, well, when I arrive home and you detect me on the cameras, turn the lights on. This idea of, say, text to action and prompt to action. So that's sort of like an interesting concept as well, is that you're just using a language model as a tool for interpretation of something, and then using that output to trigger something in another system.
Can I comment on that?
Sure.
I love that idea, because we obviously have text to answers.
Yeah.
But what then happens? What's the downstream execution of those tasks?
Yes.
Now, some of that technology has been around for a while. With my Google Home, I can say switch on the lights, switch off the lights, but it's fairly mundane.
Yes.
But imagine you can talk into your app on your phone and say, if I do get home later than 7, please start boiling the water so long.
Yes.
Or imagine you can say, how many of my clients right now are on the app? Please give them a 10% discount if they buy in the next hour, and it executes that task based on you speaking to it. Or from an IoT point of view, type in close all the security gates after 7 if there's no one. That is an interesting concept. I'm going to think about that a lot. If you guys can get that right, it'll be revolutionary from a business point of view, Andrew.
Correct. And also exactly how we see language models, let's call it being a data expert. So if you think about, say, business data, a business they might answer their own question or be able to ask their own question, but more often than not, they have to go to, let's call it a business analyst, a data analyst in their team to essentially get the answers that they want. But if you have a language model that has the entire context of your business and its business data, you as an executive could be, well, who are the customers I need to call right now that are potentially going to default or something like that. So that's what also we see, is that language models and AI being a accelerator and enabler, and let's call it a scaler of human intelligence, where you might not be able to find the skills in the marketplace, or the average small business might not be able to afford let's call it a data scientist to help them make these decisions. And then essentially large language models can help those individuals or those businesses essentially scale their insights at a more cost-effective rate.
It makes me wonder about the future of such skills, of data scientists and business analysts. Now, we never really talk about them when we talk about the impact of AI on white and blue-collar workers. And we obviously will need those skills, but will the need diminish because the system can do what the business analyst would have done in any case? So that's and what pivot will traditional technological careers need to go through in this era?
I think one of the interesting things is, if you, for instance, take programming or let's call it data science, the overarching thing that programmers and data scientists have done is actually made their work less on purpose. They almost create things that allow them to do less, which is, say, not a bad thing, because then you can say do more with your time. But the very people that the technology essentially would disrupt are the creators of it in the first place. It's a very sort of interesting thing. It's like, why do we self-destruct or create things that essentially would displace our own skill sets? But I think what we've seen in the market is that there's no substitute for high quality human intelligence that truly understands what they're trying to do and trying to solve. I think it's just a scaling mechanism, so that instead of a team of 20 data analysts, you can have sort of 3 or 4 smaller team of really high impact individuals, and essentially scale out the rest using technology, much like all these cloud services. We don't have servers sitting on premise anymore in server rooms. It's all compute in the cloud. That's just enabled us to scale to as many servers as we want. The need for that compute hasn't diminished. So I think as the market grows, those skill sets will just continue to fill that space. That's sort of my personal view.
I think where we will have to pivot a little bit is that business understanding, because a lot of times these people are exceptionally smart, very technical, but to problem solve with a client and then to use that technical knowledge to do it, I sometimes see that gap. Because clients often can describe to you the symptoms of their problem, but not really why they're having it. And it's an articulation thing. Prompting is an articulative skill as well. But that's why I hate RFPs, because I sometimes read it, request for proposal, and I'm still not sure what the client's bothering them and what we need to do. But to listen to that client and to have a business solution mindset backed by technical skills, I think if very technical people in this field can grow in that, they will be totally irreplaceable.
And I think as well, at the end of the day, it's all about creating value. So if technology doesn't create value, what's its reason for existing? So anybody in a technical skill set or a technical position, even when they look at their internal projects where, for instance, you said, let's AI everything, ask the critical questions like, what is the value of AIing this? What is the value of doing this? And I think that's a question that people don't ask, because the technical challenge is exciting to do and interesting to do. But the fundamental question of, does it actually add value? The cost to do it, the cost to maintain it into the future, will we actually get those benefits? And I think much how, for instance, say, the IoT space 5 years ago had this hype wave. People said, put sensors on this. Okay, well, if we're measuring that, whether I know it or not, what value does it create? And it's the same, well, let's AI this. Okay, well, we can, but what value does that create? What value does it unlock? Those are the more fundamental, say, business questions.
And I think that's often where we as technologists fail when it comes to dealing with our clients, because we like the tech. We like to give them 55 RPA robots and this thing and that thing. I think a challenge is, and the clients I deal with, I say that the ownership of AI ultimately is the board, but the person on the board is the chief financial officer. And people don't like it, especially technologists sometimes that I deal with. And we struggle to explain to that person in financial balance sheet kind of terms what our robots will do. We just talk about the specs and stuff, and that's relevant. But I think the value sale will probably be better with the CFO, who will most likely pay for it and anyways get it. But I think just broadly speaking, we in the industry sometimes shoots ourselves in the foot because we're so excited about the tech. And that person that's non-technical, but the purse strings, don't have a clue what we're talking about. We must get better at explaining it in their terms,
And if you look at the industry at large and the people that you're speaking to, like, what would you say? It's a tough question, but what would you say people are missing? Like, what are the obvious things that people are missing, or something that you understand that they might not understand in the same way, that sort of like hits you? Are people missing something in this technology, or think it's going to do something that it shouldn't?
It's a great question. I always say the end goal of AI and automation and similar tools, because the question to a customer that I often ask is, to do what? So we want an AI, but to do what? The answers tell me that they are overhyped. They've been to all the conferences. They spoke to all the big consulting firms. Because the to do what is the question. In other words, so the end goal of automation, AI, and these things is, amongst other things, efficiencies and effectiveness. But then the question is, do you need AI to achieve that effectiveness? You know, I often tell the story about a team I worked with, and their biggest concern was the reception area, was that the printer was too far from them. So the logical answer for effectiveness was to bring the printer closer. I love that story. I've now said it very quickly though. I think people are blinded by this AI story. Now we know AI and tech can significantly help our businesses. But just take a breath and turn the conversation around. Don't start with AI and data and whatever. What are those common sense things? You know, again, and that's why you should speak to your clients standing in the bank's branch. You know, chatbots. I mean, oh my word! I don't know if anyone who loves chatting to a chatbot, because they are stupid as grass. Yeah. Okay, but I also dealt with a bank the other day, and the owner of the chatbot was super excited about it, and I actually showed her on my phone, because I bank with him, how this thing can't answer my questions, and she was astounded. Now the last story I want to quickly tell you, because I can tell you so many stories, but I went to see the leadership of one of our retail banks. And I said, and they're all super excited about AI and the things they're doing. And I said, can I ask you a favor, just before we start the meeting, can I make a call? They said, fine. So I phoned their contact center and put my phone on speaker. And I said, we can start the meeting when your bank answers my call. 45 minutes. They were astounded because they never phoned their contact center. So hopefully I answered your question, but we forget the tech initially. Think of what you have to know your staff, you have to know your customers. What are the things that will change your business? Then you work back to whether it is a printer closer or a massive AI model. That's one of the key things that I see at the moment. Overly excited about AI, and we don't really know what to do with it.
One of the interesting things I watched a couple of nights ago, you know, we in the tech industry, we've been very focused on decentralization. So, in other words, you know, no central point of control. So redundancy, multiple points of failure, not single point of failure, high availability, things like that. And you can think of crypto also as this sort of idea that's sort of distributed, no central point of failure. But the thing about AI is that it's inherently centralized, because for you to train a language model, you need the budget, you need the compute, you need the power, you need the training data, you need the expertise. You know, so the concept I heard is basically, if it's like crypto is libertarian, AI is essentially communist. And it's a very, very interesting concept, because essentially we are giving our data to a handful of LLM providers, and we can't train our own LLMs from scratch and tweak the parameters, etc. And I thought that was very, very interesting, because we've had a push to decentralization and sort of more, say, libertarian-based thinking in the technology space. But AI is inherently anti-libertarian and centralized. Yeah. I don't know what's your thoughts on that.
I love this philosophical kind of conversation. I agree with your sentiments, Andrew. I wrote a piece a while back in Business Day about what I call the digital oligarchy.
Yes.
You know, meaning if you think of Meta, of OpenAI and the others, the control they have, and that control will just increase as we use this stuff more and more. So, do we decentralize AI even in a business? I think you spoke about redundancy. There's obviously a regulation around that, especially in the banks. I think from a business point of view, we have to centralize it for some of the reasons you've just mentioned and others. Because one of my clients the other day, they just opened up the doors. Anyone can download anything that's AI related and play with it. The danger that you open up for yourself, you know. No, they were not in a very regulated space. But I think the big tech company, we're talking now about $2-3 trillion companies. It was unheard of 2-3 years ago even, I think. The power we put in their hands and the things they know about us, I think they are more powerful than most nation states already.
100%.
You know, and
definitely more
where
wealthy.
will we be in 10 years?
Yeah, more competent. Yeah. No, it's a very, very interesting concept. And, you know, I think what the lie we can tell ourselves is that some big daddy's going to protect us, and some law, some regulation would have our best interests at heart. But I mean, as you mentioned, Poppy was enacted I haven't seen any prosecutions on the trans unions and the like. So we can't, and this is one of the things that I chatted to the high school students about as well. We need to take accountability and control individually on our own security, what we put into these language models, how we interact with them. There's no government place that would we can go to some hotline where we can say, this language model is biased against me, what can I do, who can I prosecute? So the onus is going to be more and more on the individual, but that obviously is going to come with knowledge. And then what's going to happen is that there's going to be a widening gap between those in the know and those who are not in the know, who aren't technology savvy, either the very old or let's call it the underprivileged young, where the disparity between those in the know and those outside the know is so huge, and then the natural advantage in the workplace or in life is further and further apart.
Fully agree. The so-called digital divide is just, especially in our country, increasing significantly as this technology becomes more powerful. A few years ago we spoke about the fact that many people don't have good cell coverage or not good enough handsets. But if you think of our children, the schools they are fortunate to be in, and what we can teach them, we are hopefully preparing them for a future they will be irreplaceable in a way. But the masses that don't know about these things, to your point. The other point you made that I like is the fact that we need to take control. It's like outsourcing parenting to the school. That'll never work, Yeah. We have to teach our children how to be responsible with this tech. A big thing happening at the moment, especially with deep fakes, is bullying in schools. Now, bullying, or even digital bullying, has been around for some time. But, for instance, I'm no longer on Facebook. I only use LinkedIn. That's a personal choice because I just don't trust where that data is going. I put nothing about my son on Facebook anymore. One of the big problems in the US at the moment, and a lot of people don't know about it, is that they will take the pictures of young girls, and obviously these youngsters put thousands of pictures on their social media, and with deepfake technology, they create pornographic material. And then they essentially hold the parents to ransom. And we've already seen deepfakes that it's so accurate these days, you cannot determine that it's not a real video or a real audio or an image. And we already see school bullying where there's free apps where I can create discriminating kind of info about you by having one or two of your pictures and then start spreading in the school. So is that the school's job? They can possibly do a bit more. It's my job as a parent. And so that same question of, do I just put my son in front of the iPad because it's very convenient, he's not going to bother me for a while, but how good is that screen time for him? So I think educators, but parents in particular, regarding almost everything we've spoken about today, we really need to man up, if that's not a very gender inclusive word, but we need to make sure we understand this stuff. There's enough on YouTube and other platforms to learn, but we have to teach ourselves because in 5 years, if we have this conversation, there's going to be 50 other things that we didn't even think about today that's going to be harmful to our children. And it's not often when I do my talks, I'm not the kind of person, because people will hear I work in AI, so they think it's going to be about, this stuff is so great. I'm leaning more and more to this warning people dystopian kind of view, which is not very exciting for the audience. But it's almost like we're asleep at the wheel of where we're going with this stuff, Andrew.
I think if you even take the internet as well, it took us 20 years to fully realize the benefits of, say, distributed internet. I mean, if you look at the dot-com bubble, everything was, let's start an online shop and sort of e-commerce. And then, there was the dot-com bubble. But basically 20 years later, we've sort of gone back to what the promise of the bubble was. It was kind of just ahead of its time, and I think most technology is like that. Probably AI will be the same. There's this sort of wave now. It's going to take some time for the market to find its feet, introduce solutions, truly add value. But it might be that 10 years from now, all the questions we have right now are actually answered in the lens of time. So looking at that and sort of to the future, like, what's the message of hope in terms of how this technology can change our lives for the better as individuals and as a society. Like, what's your hope for the future?
Yeah, because both sides of that story, we need to look at it. And it's not just the dystopian side. I mean, the potential for job creation, although the opposite is also true, displacements, and for hyper-personalized education to really train youngsters up and people in our businesses. For healthcare, it could, especially from an IoT device point of view, if you think about that. So I think education, healthcare, and economical equality is what this technology can do. Also longevity. You can read a lot about what they call, I think it's called post-humanism, which is also, I'm not too sure if I agree with it, where imagine we never die. Now, I do certainly want to die one day, but not now kind of thing, Imagine what we can do with cancer. I mean, I spoke to somebody the other day. It's still, despite all our advancements as the human race, that's still one thing that we can't fix. We can't even fix the common cold, so maybe we're not that advanced. But hopefully it'll help us where the level of understanding and education in the world will increase because we democratize this knowledge. Hopefully it will bring more world peace because of that understanding in this globalized world. Again, the levels of education, health, access to healthcare. I mean, drones, our blood banks already using drones to get blood to far out areas. So it could be a very positive future. Personally, I have a bit of a negative view about human nature loving history. I think we probably will screw it up. I hope not.
Well, maybe if the AI takes over, we won't.
Well, then we are screwed.
Johan, thanks very much for your time today. I appreciate you coming through.
It's been great. Thanks, Andrew.
You've been watching the Insights Overflow podcast with Johan Steyn. Catch you on the next one.